and our life is shaped through our experiences. So we need to see experiences, we need to hear experiences for stuff to make sense to us. Which is why, like, yeah, I love stories. Kanakadasa, Purandaradasa, all these dasas, the reason why they started preaching God is like they started preaching God from like a very human scale.
For Arjuna, Krishna was a friend. Krishna was like a teacher, best friend. He truly believed that, and Krishna was manifested like that. And all the Gopikas, they truly believed that Krishna was their husband and Krishna was their husband. So for Draupadi, she saw Krishna as a brother, right? Like when there was this incident where people were harassing her, she looked up to Krishna and was like, "Brother, where are you? Come to save me." And then Krishna came as a brother. It is not about Krishna having 16,000 wives. It's about whoever you want Krishna to be, however you establish a relationship with God, that will make it easier to consume God and make sense of the world, right?
A Sankarshan Joshi trip.
Let's go.
Good haircut, by the way.
Yeah, thank
Go.
you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another Sankarshan Joshi trip. On this episode, we have Vaishakh Dutt, an avid story lover, story writer, director, actor. He's also a stand-up comedian and a part of improv trio based in Bangalore, which is the Bisibelebois. He's one of the podcast's favorite guest, which means podcast host's favorite guest. So Vaishak, thank you. I'm so happy and excited to talk to you today. How are you doing?
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Sankarshan. Fourth time's the charm. Sankarshan Joshi Trip, Hall of Fame, all of that. Excited, and like this is also a way I get to socialize and talk with you. So it's a lot of fun, good stuff. Looking forward to this podcast. How are you doing?
Yes, I'm doing great, Vaishak. So to set context of this podcast, yesterday morning, I was just sitting under the sun. Like, so now I spend like 10 to 15 minutes at the start of the day just sitting calm, thinking stuff, and then organizing myself for the rest of the day. So that's when a thought hit me, okay, about gods and all of that. And you were the first person that I thought to talk to because you're a very interesting man. I'll tell you why. You are an atheist, but your interest in Indian mythology and how things work in Hinduism and all of that, your curiosity really excites me. Like you're a very interesting man from that perspective. So you consider yourself to be an atheist, right?
Good introduction. Thanks for thinking about me. But like I was saying, I don't consider an atheist, or like at least not like an atheist, because I do stuff which an atheist wouldn't. Like the first thing I do when I wake up is I chant my prayers and I chant my shlokas, because these were taught to me when I was a kid, and that's more of my reason because I grew up learning all of these shlokas and stuff, right? So that's what just comes to me. That's the way I was brought up, and it puts me in a calmer space when I do it. It's a part of my routine, my meditation, whatever you want to call it. Uh, I do understand the importance of going to temples. My granddad was a pujari. He did puja at a temple. So even though like I'm not religious in any way, but I do understand the context of living in such a family and how important my culture or my upbringing in that sense was, because that was something that was really important to my granddad. So I kind of like feel like I have to respect it to whatever extent I do. So I do understand that sense as well. And like, yeah, how much ever religious my granddad was, that religious my dad isn't. And how much ever religious my dad is, I am not. So generation by generation, definitely like, I feel like we become more and more different. But like, I do understand basically what I'm trying to tell you is like, a lot of my practices are because they were my upbringing and they are my culture. It's
Like a
not because of
discipline.
a belief. yeah, it's a discipline. It's not because of my belief in something. So that way, like I'm not like an atheist. But I am not religious as well. Like there are some things that uh, re- I will not follow something because if you tell me it's because of a religion, because I don't function that way. So in that way, yeah, I'm not religious, but I'm not an entire atheist as well. I would say I'm spiritual. I'm not agnostic. I'm not agnostic in the way that I'm not telling like I don't know, does God exist? I don't think that. I have my definition of God and I have like my own version of God
Okay.
to whom I pray to, and that's just how I it took me time to get to my interpretation of God and all of that stuff, but I'll let you know more about that as we go down the episode. But basically, uh, I have my own definition. I am spiritual. I can say that, but I'm not religious, so I'm not an atheist as well.
Okay.
And why? And like again, like why I told a lot of things, why I practice whatever. Like maybe the first thing after getting out of bed of me praying, or whenever like when my dog turned one. Um, he turned one on December 30th of 2021. So when he turned 1 year old, I gave a puja in a nearby temple. Like that's because ever since I was a kid, my parents would do a puja for me on my whenever on my birthday every year. So it's just like my instinct as his parent to do it out for him. It's more of like would I come and say that um do you believe in it? Does it make sense? Is it actually true? More than that, it's like a practice that we've been following in my family, I
Yes,
would
it's
say. And
your
like
way of showing love towards your dog, right? Because your
yeah,
parents showed you love that way, and you'd like to extend the same love to your pet.
yeah, it's that same sort of love and like protectiveness and stuff. I gave like a wrote for an Abhisheka in his name in nearby temple, and like I went and I did that puja. So it's like a very mental peace. It's a calming thing because it's like I'm trying to do and I'm trying to be the best dog dad that I can. So yeah, that way, so all of this stems not from a religious point of view. It's more from like an upbringing point of view. So a lot of the things like my dad before starting his car, he prays every time. That like as I was growing up, I've seen him do that. So like even when before I start, like I tend to do he if he prays for like say 2 minutes, I pray for like 10 seconds. That's the difference that I'm talking about. But like these small things have come to me through culture and through upbringing, and that's why they're staying with me. So yeah, it stems not from a religious point of view, I would say that. And similarly, my whole huge interest in mythology and especially Indian epic tales, it all comes because of my upbringing again. My parents telling me these stories, me having these discussions with them, and like the books I used to read growing up. So all of that comes from there. But yeah, so yeah.
The first time you were here, we talked about that,
Mm,
right? Like we talked about Indian mythology and all of that. I think the perspective that you had back then, I remember you telling yourself to be atheist or something along those lines, but I think from the first episode, the first time you were here, like I think a year and a half back or something like that, to now, I think
mm,
that is something that has changed, right? Like in terms of how you uh, so your definition of God. So when you are mentioning that, you said along the lines you have curated this definition of God. So I'd like to start off by understanding your definition of God. And
mm,
before that, I'll just like to set up a foundation of why we are doing this episode. Because yesterday when I was sitting, a thing hit me that every single uh, god that we have in Hinduism, one of the critical comment that we get from other religions or anything like that is that how can a god have a human form, right? Like that's a criticism, or the way how we humanize our gods. That I've heard a lot of people criticize that. Like it sounds silly for some, and then some comment on the stories, and some try to find flaws in the tales that have been told, the mythological tales that we've been told. And you are someone whose perspective fascinates me a lot because you love Indian mythology, and especially you said you have a curated a definition of God, right? So do I, and even I also have curated my own definition of who God is. So now that we have established that, please tell us, like, what is your definition of God?
So, like, yeah, when we did do the first podcast, or the first time I was on your podcast in like December of 2020, I remember me telling that I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. And I think I still am the same. But like, yeah, I had come to like my own understanding of God for sure before that. But a few more, maybe like a mental phase that I was going through, or like whatever, did like help me, become, gave me like a different uh, perspective, I would say, or like it strengthened my already existing perspective. So I went on a trip to TM Hills. Uh, Forgetting to TM Hills. It's right near Ramnagara. So I went on like a road trip sort of thing, and over there in it's like Timappan Betta, they say that. So in that, basically, can you hear this noise? Okay. In Timappan Betta, I went. And over there, like if you look at the mountain structure, there's like this huge rock which is just sitting on like another piece of rock. So that just like fascinated me, because if you go and ask a civil engineer or something, it doesn't structurally make sense, because it looks very unstable. It's like a huge rock. And like if I look at all the other mountains in Ramnagar, that like made me look at all of the other mountains. It's like very strange. It's very strange in the sense it's like fascinating, like how such big boulders are placed in such ways. And it's like, in Timappan, but like TM Hills, like that, there's this huge rock which is sitting on like another rock, and like that just fascinated me. Like who put it there? Who placed that? Because it's structurally, it's weird. I wouldn't say like it's uh, against physics or something, but like it's like very fascinating. Such a huge boulder placed in such a risky way. And even like that is TM Hills, and there is a temple there. They call the god they established there was Timappa. And the story behind that god is that people back in that time would come, see that mountain and see that, and they would get fascinated, right? Like, oh, who put this rock there? So then they told, okay, Timappa, the god, and it's an avatar of Vishnu only, I guess. So he put the rock over here, and this built a temple in his name over there, and that temple still exists today. So that's exactly how, at least in like local level, at a very local level, that's how people understood God. So if you go to somewhere near Malleshwaram, there's something called Circle Devi something. There's a Circle Devi temple. So that temple was built so that accidents don't happen in that circle. Circle Maramma, I think. It's near Malleshwaram. So in that circle right over there. So it's like they built that temple. Devi, we got this Devi, bless this place so that accidents don't happen in this circle. Maybe at a time back then, a lot of accidents would happen. So it's actually called Circle Maramma Temple. My friend Anurup, he's doing a thesis, or he's helping in a thesis, which is about fever goddesses. So anytime there was like a disease, people would create a god out of like a devi, and like call it and basically to cure that disease from their home,
Devi is the
right? So it's like,
female gods we call
yeah,
devis, right?
female
Yes.
god, yeah.
Yeah.
So like it's uh, like a mother figure types. So like look after my child or look after my family who's suffering from this disease, and in the name of that disease, these goddesses were birthed out, right? Malleshwaram, or the place, it comes from the god Kadu Malleshwara. So it was a forest, and the god there of the forest was Kadu Malleshwara. From him, we got Malleshwaram. Banashankari, Banashankari. It's Parvati, right? So out of her is where this place birthed out. So like this is how a lot of the gods have come out. So like it's very beautiful. Like I said, Anurup doing favor goddesses, and he would tell me about how because of this disease over here, people created this god. So this is the origin of this god. So it's like very interesting how people at like a human level, how we look up to God. Because end of the day, a human God is a God for us is from a human perspective is someone who we want to take care of us, right? The art form Hulivesha, how it started off was in Mangalore side. What would happen was
Can
whenever
you
like
start off by saying
mothers.
what that is? Like Hulivesha, for all the people who are listening and don't know what it is, can you just briefly explain what it is and then continue from there?
Oh yeah, like if you've seen the recent really good Kannada movies that have come out, like, starting from Ulidavaru Kandante or the recent one Garuda Gamana Vrishabha Vahana. In that, like it's Hulivesha is an art form which is very very huge in coastal Karnataka. Here, like boys and men, they dress up and paint themselves in like tiger colors, and then they do a dance. It's called Hulivesha. They basically Vesha means avatar. So like they're in like the dress of like they're in appearance of Huli or a tiger. A Huli is a tiger, and then they dance. They dance. So it's like a very huge art form. It's like almost it's a very huge art form. It happens every year. The displays happen every year. It's a very grand affair in this thing. So the reason behind this grand affair, or like why it's such a big affair now, the reason if you go back in time was that whenever like a mother's child was sick, whenever the mother's child was sick, she would haraike, like she would, I don't know the English translation of the word haraike. It's like, uh, do this for me, God, and I will do this for you, sort of thing. It's like a prayer, basically. A mother's prayer would
Prayers
be
and
that
offering
if
sort of thing.
yeah, it's a prayer. No, it's like a prayer thing. Like,
Okay.
uh, it comes down to like if I pass this exam, I will take 3 coconuts in your temple, something like that. So something like that, like how a mother's prayer would be. Imagine like a mother's prayer. She would pray to Durga. Durga is like the Devi in Mangalore. That if my son is who is very sick right now, and sick in a sense, if he becomes fine and he becomes in like a position to move, right? Because back then, infant mortality was very high. Not a lot of kids would survive. So a child surviving is like was a huge deal. So a
Especially
mother would
fever,
pray that.
right?
Yeah. So in Mangalore side, the woman would pray that, let my child please take care of my child, and if he becomes fit and fine again, I will make him dance as your vehicle. A tiger is Durga's vehicle, right? So so they will dress as a tiger, and in Kannada there's like a very beautiful way, like on make him walk and I will make him dance, something like that. So yeah, it's a very huge, intense art form in the sense that they squat heavily, they dance very heavily. So when it's very heavy on the bones, like it's a very intense sort of dance. And that is because like yeah, they survive and they have to hurt their bodies so that because Durga was the one who took care of them and they reached this position, correct? So that's how this art form birthed out, and now it's like a huge cultural entertainment sort of thing, right? So what I mean to say that like when you look at it from like a human perspective, everything in like our surroundings, especially be it with our gods and stuff, they have like a very human touch to them. It comes from human desires, human wants, human needs to take care of your loved ones during a sickness, to prevent accidents in a circle, right? So that's what I mean to say. So going back to the Hills trip that I'm speaking of, and when I saw that, that rock didn't like it just fascinated me, such a big rock, and that reminded me of a poem by Kanakadasa called Tallanisadigo Kandya Taluman. Is it Kanakadasa or Purandaradasa? I hope I don't. Only on my podcast it gets all of this happens. Let me just check.
Uh,
Tallanisadigo Kandya Talumanave.
Are you just Googling it to fact check?
Yeah, I'm right. It's Kanakadasa only. 1 second.
Really
This-
appreciate your efforts to cross check and put out the a right valid information.
Yeah, no. I know it's Kanakadasa.
But you just want to be
So
sure of it.
yeah. So I don't want to make a mistake. I know, but like I know it's Kanakadasa, but when I come on podcast and I'm telling, oh, my mind is like, are you sure? What if you're telling it wrong? So that way. But it is Kanakadasa. So Kanakadasa has a poem called Tallanisidiru Kandya Talumante. And like I'd like to go over the poem as well on this. So the poem basically means Tallanisidiru Kandya Talumante. Meaning in a very cute way, it's saying like don't worry mind. Kandya is like in a way of saying Kanda, Puta, right? Or like my
Beloved.
child, my beloved, right? So in a very cute way, it's telling Tallanisidiru meaning don't worry, right? Don't worry, my child. Talu manave. Talu manave meaning rest, like, be peaceful, like, don't ease your mind. So, don't worry, child, ease your mind. ಎಲ್ಲರನ್ನು ಸಲಹುವೆನು ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಶಯವಿಲ್ಲ. Meaning, he will help everyone. There is no doubt about it. So, the context of the poem is don't worry, child. Don't worry, child. Ease your mind. He will help everyone. Don't worry. And there is no doubt about it. And then he comes and breaks it down. How does he break it? ಬೆಟ್ಟದ ತುದಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಹುಟ್ಟಿದ ವೃಕ್ಷಕ್ಕೆ ಕಟ್ಟೆಯನ್ನು ಕಟ್ಟಿ ನೀರೆರೆದವರು ಯಾರು? ಹುಟ್ಟಿಸಿದ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ ತಾ ಹೊಣೆಗಾರನಾಗಲು ಗಟ್ಟಿಯಾಗಿ ಸಲಹುವೆನು ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಶಯವಿಲ್ಲ. The same why this PM Hills reminded me of this was in the poem he's saying, who put that tree on the edge of that mountain over there? Who did that? Right? Who did that? He will only take care of you, right? Because who is taking care of that tree, right? It birthed out. Like if you go and you will see like a beautiful flower birthed out in concrete, in a concrete footpath where everyone pisses, throw garbage. Out of there, like a beautiful flower will be born. Who did that? Like I know like the scientific reason behind it and all of that, but like there is something taking care of that flower. That same thing will take care of you also, don't worry.
That entity.
Yeah, it's an entity or an energy or a force
Could
or
be
whatever
anything,
you want
yeah.
to call it. Yeah. ಅಡವಿಯೊಳಗಾಡುವ ಮೃಗ ಪಕ್ಷಿಗಳಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಅಡಿಗಡಿಗೆ ಆಹಾರವಿತ್ತವರು ಯಾರು? ಪಡೆದ ಜನನಿಯ ತೆರದಿ ಸ್ವಾಮಿ ಹೊಣೆಗೀಡಾಗಿ ಬಿಡದೆ ರಕ್ಷಿಸುವೆನು ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಶಯವಿಲ್ಲ. For like animals and birds, someone has kept food everywhere.
There's food
If you look at a
everywhere in
squirrel,
nature for every species.
Yeah.
Like animals in forest.
yeah,
Who gave food
Yeah.
for them, right? Like that's what it's saying there.
yeah, like in every place itself. Like if you look for the squirrel, like if you think of a squirrel, there's like food everywhere, and for every living organism, it's living its life on its own. It's living its life, and it's able to take care of its needs. If it's like a deer in the forest, it has grass, it has things everywhere around in there. A lion has food everywhere. So like every organism has a way of conducting its life. And it has been. If humans never came into existence, each and every organism would like, have their own
Ecosystem.
food and like, yeah, they've been taking care of this without us intervening, right? Who kept those ahara? Who kept the food for these animals everywhere? That same person who kept that food, he will take care of you also. Don't worry. Right? There's something even more beautiful. He says like ಕಲ್ಲಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಹುಟ್ಟಿದ ಕೂಗುವ ಕಪ್ಪೆಗಳಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ಲಿಗಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಆಹಾರ ತಂದಿವರು ಯಾರು? A frog that is born in the crevice of a rock somewhere, for that insignificant species also, here this force has found a way to take care of it, give it food, and become big. There is something that is doing. That same person who is doing this, he will take care of you also. So in a way that like, and like it's told in a lot of renditions of this Kanakadasa, and like Kanakadasa, Purandaradasa, all these dasas, who the reason why they started preaching God is like they started preaching God from like a very human scale. Their how was it back in time? If you had to pray to God, how would you have to pray? You'd have to chant these complex Sanskrit shlokas, and over time, then came Baswana and Akamahadevi, right? Alama Prabhu. They're all the forebearers of the Lingayat movement. How did they transition from that to that? Vachanas. So vachanas are much more easy for the common man to say, and they are giving a definition of, like they're like helping the normal person interpret and become close to God in their own way, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, they're preaching life lessons. Then these dasas, how they do it is they wrote songs. They're singers. If you look at these renditions, there are like a lot of renditions on YouTube about Tallani Sadiru Katya Talu Manave. They're beautiful, tear-jerking songs. What are they telling? They're soothing you. They're telling how it's told from like such a cute perspective. It's like there's an English song like "Ooh, child, things are gonna get easier." It's the same way how this is told. It's like telling child Kanda Putta. There's like, don't worry, ease your mind.
The
He will
best
take
part
care of
about this Vaishak is, so when you read that poem, right? When you read what Kanakadasa wrote, so it says in a way, everybody, when we look at human beings, we think that we are in control of certain things, right? And nature has its way of evolution. Let's say, so in the kids' perspective, kids need to build immunity, right? And even when they have to build immunity, they'll have to get sick, build immunity, get sick, build immunity. So when Kanakadasa wrote this poem, let's say from a mother's perspective, if your child is sick, you want that kid to get better, but there is nothing you can do about it. So in a way, like, don't feel that you have control, leave it to the nature or like a bigger energy to handle things, right? And if you look at it, just the mental peace that you get from that, like, so let's say if a lot of people go through a lot of negative thoughts and negative whatever it might be, like negative results for in any relationship, it's because they think they have control over things that they don't have control over, and that sort of leads to a lot of problems. And this poem, just taking off that load, helps them, right, like mentally. So I just wanted to
yeah,
add
and
that before we move ahead with whatever you were saying. Like, very beautiful, Vaishak, the way you're
and
explaining.
it's and it's telling you to, it's calming your mind. Plus, how is it? How it's a song. Music calms you down naturally when you listen to something melodious or something. It calms you down naturally, and which is why it's such a powerful tool, right? This one helped a person back in that day listening to this. It helped him reach his own understanding of God, and it helped me in my own way. So like this, it reminded me of this poem. Like for me to like, I knew the meaning of it, and like I like it's actually like a a poem in first or second PUC. It's a very beautiful poem, and like I kind of knew the meaning of it, but for me to realize the value of it,
Right.
it happened to me when I went to TM Hits. So it was like, and it just hit me like, and like I was also worrying about stuff back then. So I was like, yeah, the same thing that's taking care of this rock, who put this rock, that thing is gonna take care of me too. And it's gonna take care of all of us, right? And whatever I can't, it's of course like I have the want and need to control everything ever. So that's who I am. But every now and then it's okay. It's okay. Just like don't worry. Like and I am an overthinker. So don't think so much. Ease your mind. Kaadu manave. It's like calm down. Calm down. It's gonna be fine. So this like and like it like made my bond with nature much stronger as well. So uh because like from like a nature setting, like how is the world so beautiful? Sometimes when I see my dog, I see God. Like how did a creature come who's so loving, who's takes care of me, who loves me, like even if I yell at him, 2 minutes later he's back with the same love. How did God create a creature who is so full of love, who doesn't harbor negativity, who doesn't keep the same negative emotions inside and doesn't carry it forward. All of these things are like God, they're all godliness. So that's what I mean. So it's it's strengthened by that point. And I feel like that's my connect with my version of God or anything. Anything else is more of I'm not religious in any way. So it took me time to come to this understanding, and let's see, maybe as time passes, my interpretation or my version will change. I can't say for sure, but the things such as praying up, or like before every theater show that I've done it, before every improv show, I touch the feet of my parents and my grandparents. Uh, my grandmom, I touched their feet. Before my first day of my job, I touched their feet and asked for their blessings. After I got my first salary, I touched their feet and got their blessings. So these are all things which have come to me from culture, not because of, you know,
God.
my granddad, like whenever like any guest would come home, used to irritate me a lot. Like he would just be like, Vaishak, you touch their feet. And they'll be like, "Eh, why their feet?" So like every time he would do it, like I don't do it to that extent. But like I understand, like I do it out of like my respect and my upbringing and my culture. And I like doing it. It calms me and it's like a way of life for me. But yeah, this is how I separate my spirituality aspect as such. It comes from like it's not like a deep, my spirituality doesn't come from like something deep as like, there are chakras in this body, this cosmos, all of that stuff. It comes down to like the most basic human form. Kanakadasa telling me to not worry, and like a mother asking, my mom asking, going to like a temple she went to Kukke Subramaniam, my mom and dad, which is like 300 kilometers away from here, 350 kilometers away from here, just to pray that I do well in my exams. These things are like very human. And if that helps you lead your life and that's your understanding of God and stuff, that's mine too. So I would say that's how I am as a person. But yeah.
So I think we both are similar in a lot of aspects when it comes to God. Because for me, right, philosophy, I don't know how to put it, but it is changing my life. So whenever I read anything or whenever I listen to a poem, right, for me it's not about belief. I mean, in the entire Hinduism, a lot of people have belief, and that's how they function, right? Like from faith and belief. And there is other subset of people who, for them, philosophy can have a lot of impact. Like philosophy in proportion to our actual life. I mean, like that's how it works, right? So when I, let's say, this poem that you're talking about, it just hits me. Like if I listen to Gita and then there is something that Krishna said, it just hit me. So Jordan B. Peterson, right? Like I remember you mentioning him about like the 12 rules for life. We had this entire bit in our first podcast. I didn't know who he was, and then now he's like one of my favorite people in this whole world. Like I have heard hundreds of hours of him from that episode to here. I have like I have heard him n number of times. Anything that he says, right, philosophically, that hits me. So my mode of how I do better in life and my mode of how I function, it's philosophy. Like it can help me. Let's say if I'm in a very sad state, certain lines said by someone, it just translates me, I process it, and then I bring that to action. So in Gita, Krishna says, you are the doer, you focus on doing it and don't dwell on the result, right? You leave the result to me. So you said that as well, like karmanyedi karaste. I don't have that line by heart, but you do. So it says you do something, do it passionately and don't worry about the results. And let's just say that I'm in an office environment and my boss didn't give me compliment for my work. And let's say if I'm anxious and if I'm overthinking and I'm sad, just this one line, right? That says focus on doing your best and don't dwell on the result. Just thinking about that line, it just hits my mind like reset, like refresh. And for me, that's how I function. And like even throughout my podcast also, like if you go through my solo episodes, I just observe things and how people do. And then let's say I read a book or I've heard this poem or like some spiritual thing. It's just like I connect it to human behavior and how people function and how do I function well in my life. So that has been my mode of doing it. So I think there are three types of yoga in Hinduism or like in Indian spirituality. Yoga is action, right? Doing. One is bhakti yoga, which is faith, belief, and then it goes like that. Second is karma yoga, where you do action, and then like you physically do stuff, let's say meditation, like types of meditation, and then physical yoga. And then the third is jnana yoga, where you are reading about spirituality. It's more about philosophy, like you want to know, like jnana means knowledge, right? Like you want to know more about that. For me, the third one connects a lot, like third one and second one. I mean, I do have faith, but I don't function purely on belief and faith. So my mom, she functions completely on belief and faith. Like, so if there's a problem, she just stands in front of the god, let's say it could be like a photo or idol, like whatever she thinks god is, and she truly surrenders with belief and like and a lot of faith. And then there's my dad. Like my dad, he's the second guy. Like he does a lot of meditation and he has his like some breathing technique that he does like while meditating. For him that is like for him any faith or belief, he doesn't do anything blindly. Like for him that is his way of connecting with god. He does that meditation and all of that. For me, the third one, because I live in the real world and I don't disregard real world, and I don't disregard spiritual stuff that is being told also. So I try to make sense of that and how I can apply it in real world. So like marriage between that, so that's why stories and like anecdotes that have been passed on to us from our ancestors, right? Like, or when I read any krishna story or like could be any god story, that helps me a lot. And you are someone who loves story too. So how does your like how do you translate mythological stories or into your mental space, man? Like how do you let those story reflect into your life?
An interesting question. Uh, for me, like when I look at stories, they're just stories, and I can definitely look at it and like I learn, and as a person, like I tend to analyze things and go very deep into stuff and all of that. So like I that's just who I am, and I try to like come up with my own interpretations of stories, look at the positives and look at the negatives, and that's just how I am. So if you look at like something like how does it reflect in my real life, it's that I would say like sometimes I'm just walking and like or I'm just doing stuff and it hits me. Something like something I'll give you an example. If you look everywhere, Krishna is portrayed as the ideal lover. Like like if any girl would want to have a lover like Krishna, right? Everyone says that. Uh, it's throughout. Like Krishna is seen as this ideal lover sort of situation, and like throughout, like since I was a child, I'd be like, why is it Krishna? How is it Krishna? Isn't it like supposed to be Rama? Because Rama was like devoted only to one person, whereas Krishna had multiple, right? He had Radha, Rukmini, and like he also has 16,000 wives, is what they say. So, uh, so like, why is Krishna being told that? Like, isn't Rama supposed to be this ideal lover? And then, like, I was going by, and then there's this story of how Krishna got the 16,000 lovers. Sorry, 16,000 wives. What happened was, I'm forgetting the name of the Rakshasa or the person or whoever, but there was this person. I'm forgetting the name. But this evil person had entrapped 16,000 women in his castle. And Krishna went, fought, killed that demon, and then he took 16,000 avatars like at the same time, and he married all of the 16,000 women who were trapped. And that's how he got these 16,000 wives. Now that you think of it, okay, Krishna did this, but why was this? How was this story born? Why was it told? So back, like, women who have been touched by another man are regarded impure, right? Back in those times, and like that's just how it's like a misogynistic and regressive thought that like if she has been touched by someone else, she's an impure person and she does not belong in the society, etc., etc. Evil and vile thoughts and statements. So Krishna, being a god who we look up to, right? He went and he himself married all of these 16,000 girls. So, avnu aur mana kapadda, or in another way, he protected the dignity of these 16,000 girls.
Protected
So
them from
that's
the
the,
shame that society
yeah,
might
yeah,
bring up onto
yeah.
them.
He protected them from their shame, and like, and that story is telling us what sort of regressive, misogynistic thoughts and intentions do you carry when Lord Krishna himself was like this. So it's in a way of telling us that's what I mean. Like from a human point of view, they're all like stories and their values,
I am so
right?
happy. I am so happy you brought this Krishna story because
Uh,
I made notes where I wrote this exact point that you are talking about, and I put
uh,
exclamation mark next to it because I wanted to put more emphasis on this. So
uh,
I'm so sorry I'm cutting you off because
uh,
even before we proceed, I had this one friend in my 11th and 12th. I had this one friend. I still remember we were in a Sanskrit class, and he was talking shit about Krishna, Lord. Like he was talking some ill things about him. So these were his exact words. He said, a guy who is marrying so many people and who is considered to be like in our traditional sense of fuckboy, why are we treating him as a god? Like, is he who God is supposed to be? He is the God and we're supposed to pray. And that's how he was mocking Krishna. And I didn't respond anything to him, but I felt bad for him saying that. I'm like, whoa, like I've never heard anyone say something this extreme. But I didn't say anything back to him because I didn't have any reply. And over the period of time, I don't remember exactly when. I think I read this in a book or someone told me this, I don't know. So Krishna is a sort of a god, and like in Hinduism he's considered to be like a supreme god, right? Like one of the supreme gods, like topmost. And so once when I think Narada or somebody, he when he heard that Krishna has had 16,000 wives or a lot of women, he went to one of Krishna's wives home and Krishna was there. And he went to second wife's home and Krishna was there. And he went to the third wife's home and Krishna was there. And he also went to the main Krishna where he wasn't there with anybody. Like Krishna was also there. So ideally, how it was translated was Krishna was not actually there in each and every houses as their husband, but these gopikas or his, like all the women, they worshipped God and they showed love to God as their husband. You know, so initially when you were talking about Lingayat and how that Lingayat religion or community, how there were these people like Basavanna who were taking like a huge chunks of philosophy and they would tell it in such simple words that would make sense to common people. Basically they made that the huge ideal of who God is, whatever it is, into these digestible chunks, right? And so applying the same logic into this Krishna's thing, people are building a relationship with God and they are showing love to God. So basically Krishna will be whoever you want him to be if you show him love in that sense. So For Arjuna, Krishna was a friend. Krishna was like
Best
a
friend.
teacher, best friend. He truly believed that, and Krishna was manifested like that. And all the Gopikas, they truly believed that Krishna was their husband and Krishna was their husband. And for Draupadi, right? Draupadi, oh my god, like, dude, I'm getting goosebumps. So for Draupadi, she saw Krishna as a brother, right? Like when there was this incident where people were harassing her, she looked up to Krishna and was like, "Brother, where are you? Come to save me." And then Krishna came as a brother. It is not about Krishna having 16,000 wives. It's about whoever you want Krishna to be, whoever, like God. So Krishna is God. However, you establish a relationship with God, that will make it easier to consume God and make sense of the world, right? So I think this is something that actually like gives me goosebumps, like every time I try to make sense of it. So now building relationship part of any Indian mythological story, it it just blows my mind. So that Krishna's part that you were talking about, I just wanted to add this because I wanted to talk about
Yeah,
this. Yeah.
yeah. So like that's how stories come down to like a human form, to like us common people. When stories they end up like going over all these, and when they reach us, this is what they're trying to tell, right? And this is why Krishna is shown as that. Rama is shown as the ideal son because of how he was and all of that, right? So end of the day, they do come down to stories, and like we need to look at these stories and realize who we are and what can we learn from them in that. So yeah, that's how stuff reflects in my real life. That's how stories come into my real life.
Right. I think for some weird reason we human beings love stories. I recently, I don't know if you heard, Jordan B. Peterson was on Joe Rogan's podcast. It was a 4 hour long ass podcast. I Did you give it a listen?
No, I haven't.
Okay,
I haven't.
okay. So in that he goes on and on about this part about like Jesus and the stories in the Bible. He does the same thing, like he's trying to make sense philosophically of what those stories tell. And there is this, interestingly, he mentions how stories have been a part of humanity even before paper pen books existed. So cavemen, when they're drawing something in the cave, they're telling a story. So a lot of stories have been passed on like word of mouth, like even songs, right? A lot of art forms have evolved to tell those stories, right? Like every art form tells stories, and we want stories, man. Like that's how philosophy will be passed on, and that's how philosophy will stay in humanity. So I think stories play a really, really important role. uh, I think it makes sense when you say that you're fond of stories and how it translates.
Yeah, for sure. Stories, songs, plays, movies, everything, all sort of art form. That's like because end of the day we're human, right? And like that's just how our mind moves, and that's just how we're convinced. And our life is shaped through our experiences. So we need to see experiences, we need to hear experiences for stuff to make sense to us. Which is why, like, yeah, I love stories. And for sure, for me, like how I understood and like I came about all this was through Amar Chitra Kathas. They were stories, comic book formats, right? They were end of the day they were comic books, and I used to read them over and over and over again. So that's how like it shaped me as a person. So yeah, for to each one their own. To some person, like for me, like I remember, like my granddad would wake up every day around 6 and he would start his puja at home. I would start getting ready for school. And when I was getting ready for school, I would hear his shlokas over and over, that thing. And like that slowly, initially, maybe in beginning, it was like, what is he chanting? What is he saying? But as time passed, like it started making sense. So this is what he's saying. And this, because end of the day, it comes down to experiences. So yeah, that's why like stories are, that's what I believe in. They make humans human.
Yeah, I think we have a very special connection to biographies, right? Like when we look at Steve Jobs' story, or when we look at a movie which is based on real life, When we, I don't know if you know Francis Ngannou, like he's a MMA fighter. He was on Joe Rogan's podcast and he told his story of how he came from a village and like how basically he smuggled himself into France or like some country like illegally, and while crossing 4 or 5 times there was this very like a wall, and there were these thorns or like the barbed wire that they put around it. So he fell on it like twice or thrice where he cut his skin and he got stuck in the barbed wire. So he struggled a lot to cross that country and go to find a better opportunity for himself, and he was inspired by Muhammad Ali and he wanted to do something for his life. And then now he's a like I think he's a heavyweight champion of like UFC. There is something about the real life struggles and real life stories. It's like he is me, I am human, and like we are in the same planet. If he has gone through something that is so traumatic and he has achieved something, even I can do it. I think that is where the like if you look at Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, people get inspired, man. Like if you go to YouTube, there are a lot of motivational stuff where people just talk about their own life story and we get goosebumps and we want to do it. I think that's where the humanizing part of things come. Like now Ramayana, Mahabharata, the two epics, they are like big ass stories, and the way how they showed things was a very, I mean, there are a lot of metaphors here and there and something that we don't seem to be natural, but it is still a story, right? And similarly, if a man can do that, like now let's say Rama, when you go to Rama's story, he was an ideal son, and the way how he was, like when you listen to that story, you want to be that person, like you want to be that son, you want to be that friend, like you want to be that person that he is. I think we human beings have figured this out like centuries back, and that's how stories have like stayed even now, and that's how we conveyed, right? Like I think that is a very underrated part of mythology, or at least like Indian
For, sh-
mythology.
for sure, for sure. And like another beautiful thing about stories, and we discussed this back in like the previous podcast as well, where like it's the beautiful thing about stories, and especially like these mythological and like any stories in general, is that it's not just what the story is about. Something that's beautiful is the storyteller. Who is the storyteller, right? So if we take the case of Ramayana, there the birth of Ramayana was Valmiki's Ramayana. Valmiki writing the Ramayana in Sanskrit. Not everyone understood Sanskrit, so it would go pass through word of mouth. And when one storyteller is telling the same story to another storyteller, right? He just doesn't tell the story. He also carries his emotions for it. So he just doesn't give the translation of the Ramayana. If he hates Kaikeyi for doing that to Rama, or if he hates Ravana for doing something to Sita, that emotion will also come out in him when he's telling that story. Like Ravana was this evil person, he did this, he did that. Or maybe there was this person who thought that Ravana was an ideal man, but he just had this small slip up, and because of that, he kidnapped Sita. Let's say he thought someone thought that way. So, like him telling Ravana was actually like a really good person. That also reflects in them. And when the listener listens to it, that also shapes his thinking because he's seen it through this perspective. And when he passes it on, he gives his own perspective. So throughout time, like these stories, they're not just stories. They carry emotions. They carry generations, years and years, thousands of years worth of human emotions in them, right? And when like eventually it came down to Tulsidasa's time, Tulsidas wrote the same thing in Hindi in singable form called Ramacharitra right? So in that like Ramacharitra so in that it's a more common form. So like his version was shown in that. And like the same thing in if you look at Mahabharata, especially in Kannada literature, it starts off with Veda Vyasa's Mahabharata, right? But that when Adi Kavi Pampa wrote it, right? he had a take. It was called Adikavi Pampa's Mahabharata is actually called Vikramarjuna Vijayam, because for him Arjuna was the hero in the Pandav, like he was the hero, and he wrote it from that sort of view. So if you heard that, if I lived during that time, for me Arjuna would be my hero, right? And then if I heard if but then came Ranna and he wrote Sahasa Bhima Vijayam. And for him, Bhima is the hero. So if I heard that, for me, Bhima would be my hero, and that's how I would be. And then came Kumara Vyasa, whose rendition of the Mahabharata is my favorite, and that's a very neutral sort of view. So which is why, like, I feel when I look at things, I am also very neutral in a way. And in a sense, then later I read Mahabharata and all of that. And when my dad used to tell me the Mahabharata, for him, Karna was his favorite character, which is why for me as well, like, that shapes my thinking. And when I tell it to someone else, maybe when I tell it to you, or maybe it shapes your thinking as well. You just don't see the story. Like if you read the Mahabharata, let's say you like read it from scratch now. When you read the part about Karna, you'll be like, oh yeah, I understand why Vaishak likes him, right? It's a very similar thing. If the first Marvel movie you saw was Iron Man, your favorite Avenger is Iron Man. If the first Marvel movie you saw was Captain America, your favorite Avenger is Captain America. Let's say you didn't watch that at all. You saw Batman, right? Then like your favorite hero is Batman. It's as simple as that. But when you that's how like these things influence us, and they're within us, and we don't even realize that we carry these values, and this is how our understanding was formed. Just as how important our experiences, our childhood experiences, be it with friendships, relationships, with our teachers, in our family, whatever, how they influence us as people and make us people, the type of media we've consumed, the type of stories that we have heard, right? All of this consume and make us people as well. And this is where our thinking comes from. So that's the beautiful part of storytelling. And this is like, it's so like beautiful in the sense that like sometimes, yeah, because just as important as a story is who's telling the story. And that's so beautiful, right? It's so nice. And which is why like we need more interpretations of the same story, because that is what makes us think. When you try to gatekeep a story and try to tell that this is the only right way to tell something, you are actually causing harm to the story. You're causing harm to the art form. You're causing harm to what it of its true potential, right? And which is why like whenever like people try to gatekeep religion back in our time, when like the high Brahmins, the high status people, they try to keep the religion for themselves, that this is how you're supposed to pray to God, you should say these exact shlokas in these exact same ways. They were like, when they were trying to gatekeep that, in a way what was happening was they were breaking the connection between the people and God, like they were making it hard. And which is why time and again and again and again there have been people who have come and tried to sever that bond. the and the common man has always won. Nobody in a higher status has ever won, whenever they've tried to gatekeep something, right? Even so, like when they were trying to gatekeep religion, then came Baswana, Akamadevi, Alama Prabhu, and they told, no, you cannot keep me from understanding the God the way I want to. This is how I understand him. How do I understand him? How how to live my daily life, living right, living my Kayakave Kailasa is Baswana's motto. Meaning, I find God in the work that I do, which is why in the worker community or in the worker class, that's why Lingayats are huge, because when you find God in the work that you do, Kayakave Kailasa is the interpretation. They're like, you will not tell me that the only way I worship God is by going to temple and doing all these pujas and doing that. No, this is how I find my God. And that's how many people started believing, and they understood, oh yeah, Mahavir Jain, he came. How I will see God is through non-violence. I will not harm anything. I'm going to live a very sattvic lifestyle. And people related to that, and they read. Buddhism, he had like the 9 values of Buddhism, right? This is how I see God, and this is my lifestyle. Kanakadasa, Purandara Dasa, this Dasa is a community. This is how I see my God. right? So when you try to gatekeep something, what I'm trying to tell is like when you try to gatekeep something, people will fight back and they will not allow you to gatekeep something. And this is not meant to be gatekept. Like you cannot hold stories, you cannot hold ideas and tell this is the only way to tell the story. Like sometimes, like obviously you shouldn't do injustice to the story. I shouldn't go about tell Mahabharata in like a very unjust and like in a very ignorant way. But yeah, I am allowed to come up with my own interpretation, my own understanding of the same thing. I can't obviously go and tell like, hey, Pandavas, 5 boys were there, they were used this. That's me doing injustice. But for me to tell the Pandavas, in the Pandavas, what I thought Yudhishthira did was wrong, or I think Bhima was the only right husband to Draupadi. Something like that. Like these interpretations, I'm allowed to have them because that's what stories are supposed to do to you. They're supposed to evoke emotions. They're supposed to make you think. They're supposed to make you understand it. That's how they reflect in your real life. You asked, right? So that's what I mean. So you can't gatekeep stories. And I find that it's happening a lot, especially now, where like if you try to twist the way a story is told, like there's like a huge uproar and like it's like it's not seen, it's very unsuitable for the story format to grow. Because what makes the story, it's end of the day, it's just words on a piece of paper. But when you read them and you think them and you put your own emotion to them, that's when they start making sense. So which is, yeah, it's as simple as like this gatekeeping thing is like why Indians are huge, how cricket became huge in our country is because it was gate kept as like high class Englishmen would only play this. So we Indians were like, fuck you. And we started, it became like a very common, like local gully cricket, it became for us. So it was like a middle finger to the class system in a way. So like, end of the day, human emotion triumphs everything. And yeah, that's how stories grow, that's how we grow, and that's how we progress as a society.
Absolutely,
So
Vaishak. I
yeah.
think that emotion part is, I think you can try to understand someone's pain, but when you go through a pain, the way how you see things is entirely different. So I think a lot of people, when you say philosophically, they disregard feelings, right? Like in a sense, think with your brain, not with your heart. And I understand that because sometimes our insecurities drive our actions, and our insecurity is a feeling of lacking something, and that is a feeling, and that's an emotion. I understand that. But I think even though you need to think rationally and not let your insecurities drive your actions, emotions, right? I think it's a feedback mechanism. So when you touch fire, it hurts, it burns, and you know that you shouldn't touch fire again. So I think sensorily speaking, emotion is something that is like a feedback mechanism to make you feel like what is right, what to do and what not to do. So when you listen to stories also, if they evoke a certain emotions in you, it sort of it builds a belief system of what is right and what is wrong, what is the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. So when you listen to our stories of injustice, it hurts you, right? Like you want to be in that story and make things right. So that sort of builds your conscience of like what is the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. More than the story being right or wrong, it's the values that it's building. I think that's more important. So you saying that emotions from stories perspective is crucial, 100% agree with you there.
The thing is like, yeah, and we see that in the childhood cartoons that we've seen, the movies that we watch now. So yeah, they're everywhere. They're and stories just don't have to be about actual stories. The experiences your family members had, or the struggles of your parents when they were young, or the struggles of your grandparents when they had to take care of or build a family. These are all stories too, right? And this is how they affect us and they influence us. But yeah,
Yeah.
which is why like keep sharing experiences, what I tell everyone. And once we need to be open and we need to put our perspective out there to a certain sense. We need our beliefs. And like when we do that, it's also very important to like hear these other stories, right? So, and to then only can we understand each other's emotions. If we just state facts, there is like we won't understand. But in order to empathize, we have to tell stories and understand the emotion where that is coming from, and all of that, right? So only then can we reach mutual consensus, and that's what I said. We need stories to grow as a society. But yeah.
Yeah, we can empathize with the black people and the black community. I don't know if it's a socially acceptable thing to call them blacks, but they have been through a lot of things culturally in the past, like slavery and all of that. And when you look at movies or when you look at songs or anything, it's all storytelling, right? I think storytelling is a way of understanding how somebody is feeling so that we can empathize with them better. So it's not just about spirituality. There is this element of story that it'll give you a sneak peek into what the other person has went through, and I think that is the only way that you get to experience someone else's pain through stories. So you know what, earlier when you were talking about Mahabharata and the importance of storyteller, as for somebody in the Mahabharata, out of all the characters, if they say Bhima is, they think Bhima might be the hero, and somebody say Arjuna is the hero, and someone says Krishna is the hero, or anything. It's that perspective, right? And you say that there, like, we should encourage other perspectives. And if you ask me, I think we should create. It's not like, I think that is the only way that you're gonna move forward. Like, you should have your own perspective. Like, you can listen to someone else's perspective, but you should have, like, that's like a must. Because when you read Gita, right, you read from your experiences in life. Like, there is only one Vaishakh Dutt who has been through the experiences that you have been through. So when you read something, you perceive it from your experiences, right? So when I'm reading Gita, if Arjuna or if Krishna says, like, focus on what you're doing and not the result. So, or see God in everything. Like, there is God in animal, there's God in sun, there's God in water, the smell after rain. So that is God. So see God in every living thing. And let's say you have been in a friend circle. This is just a random example where people were very hateful about things. They're just dropping comments, negative comments about everything that is around you. And then you listen that, you know what, there is God in every single thing. And that sort of creates a perspective that, you know what, appreciate everything in the nature, appreciate everything that's around you, because that's God. Like, love everything, love everybody. Like, some religion preaches that, right? Like, love everyone. So I think that your experiences, even though you don't want to, you are going to have a perspective, because that is how you're going to digest stuff. So for somebody who's lactose intolerant, they can't drink milk, right? So what's the point? So they need to go for vegan sources of milk. So because you can digest the vegan source and you can't digest the animal milk, and it is as simple as that. Like, whatever you can digest, you go for that. So when you build your own perspective, it is like taking up a larger chunk of philosophy, religion, God, energy, positive energy, could be anything. You digest it through what you are capable of digesting
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, as simple as that. If like you are willing to put in the time to understand the complexities of philosophy on your own, do that. Or if you just want to hear a YouTube video about it, do that. But yeah, and like the way you say that, like it's a must to develop a perspective. The perspective naturally comes up on its own.
Right.
But do you feel like you should enforce the perspective on other people? Not really, but you can like share your views and you can share your thoughts about things. That's how like, and it's very important for everyone to be accepting as well. But yeah, for sure, to consume whatever you can with the format that you can consume. And like to do something is better than to do nothing. That's definitely there, right? Like if you can't read books, if you're reading audio books, No one should come make fun of you, or you can't actually sit with the book. You're doing something about it, and that should be appreciated. And yeah,
Yeah.
that is whatever you can, like you said.
For the longest period of time, I don't know in the West or the rest part of the world, but for the longest period of time in India, we have been trying to debate, enforce what the right thing is onto other people. Like, this is the right philosophy, this is the real God, this is how you're supposed to practice religion. And that has caused a lot of chaos, pain, and bloodshed, because there were a lot of wars that were waged because of this philosophy, because they thought that that is the right thing to do, and they were enforcing their version of right thing to do onto other people. And I think they missed the entire point. It is not about what the right thing is. It's not about debating mine is right and yours is wrong. They forgot that they should understand the crux of what they are saying. Like, let's say if there are two distinct versions of God, what is the crux of their belief? What is their crux of belief? Like, understanding that, they have wasted a lot of time, lot of power, lot of energy. I think this has resulted in a lot of nihilistic, dismissive people. Like, when you look at our generation, right, there are so many versions and some are just bullshit versions, and you become very dismissive. Like, if this is what religion is, then fuck religion. If this is what God is,
Yeah,
then fuck God. So I think we just hit our own foot and we fell as humanity.
yeah. It's there, and I don't know. It's hard, I guess. I don't know what. I think it was bound to happen. Like you can't control something to that extent. Like whatever had to happen will happen. Maybe like this nihilism will grow out of proportion, and people will stop caring about it, and that will birth a sense of hopeful, make people more hopeful, and give out another version of what people think it is. Their versions. Maybe yeah, necessity is the birth of all inventions, right? So I think that's one way to think about it. And yeah, and like sometimes like yeah, we do ruin it. There is fundamentally, yeah, like I said, it is wrong to think that your perspective is the right perspective and to go about it. And when you start enforcing that, your perspective is the right perspective, that's what alienates people. They're like, I don't want my perspective. I don't want your perspective. I want no perspective. Just leave me alone. Guys, that's what happens. Right? So if like if like, I was telling the Mahabharata story to you, and then if someone then came to me and then told, hey, no, what you're telling is wrong. The version of Mahabharata, what you're saying is completely wrong. You shouldn't say it that way. It's wrong. Don't say it. If you don't know anything, don't say it. If you tell that, I'll be like, okay, I'm wrong. I don't want Mahabharata only. Let me go. Leave. Let me be alone, please. But then you're causing more harm, right? Because you're just making me not want to involve myself in a story and not care about it. Whereas if that other person came and he told, hey, I understand what you're saying, but you're making a mistake here. Karna, Krishna didn't do this because he wanted to do something wrong, but or something illegal. He did this because what he thought was right was more important. Something like that. If he came and introduced me to that'll make me think, oh yeah, maybe, right? And that'll make me think, and that'll give me my own perspective. And that's how perspectives are supposed to grow. That's how we're supposed to communicate with each other, right? But yeah, that's what it.
Minus
And
the
for
ego.
sure,
Yes, go ahead,
yeah,
go ahead, please. I'll
no,
just.
no, that like you were saying, like, but eventually, like, yeah, we are humans at the end of the day, and we will start thinking that what we think and what we believe is the right thing, and we will just continue to stick with that, right? So that's very irritating. But
I think it comes from a place of ego. So when you see, this is why I stopped indulging myself into some spiritual stuff. Like last year or like 2 years back, I had this phase in my life where I was trying to read Gita, I was trying to understand it, and it was building me perspective. But in turn, what happened is it built me an ideology which differed with my dad. So we spent the most of the time arguing, debating our perspective. So I then realized it gave me a feeling that I know something, like I know stuff. Like that thought that you know it comes from a place of ego. And that is not what spirituality is about. Spirituality is about nullifying the ego, nullifying who you are, and extending yourself to something beyond you. So then I stopped everything. Then I thought, you know what, I'm not gonna read any spiritual book, anything. I thought I'll take a sabbatical. I'll be like, I'll come back to this from a very fresh place. And so I was learning a lot of perspectives from this podcast and philosophy. I was learning from here. I thought for a while, let me do this, continue doing this. I'll go back to Gita once again. So I think from the past also, people had a very strong sense of identity they've built with their version of story and their ideology. It's like, this is who I am. Like, I am someone who believes that Krishna is the supreme lord. That's my identity. And if someone says no, Krishna is not the supreme lord, let's say Shiva is the supreme lord, or yeah, Shiva and Vishnu, that was something like Vishnu, Krishna, like they are all the same incarnations, right? So for the longest period of time, there were two different categories of people who believed Vishnu is God and Shiva is God, and they waged so much war, they spread so much hate, they threw so much shit at each other, because they thought that is who they are. Their identity became that. So now if you strip this identity off them, they don't even know who they are. Like their entire narrative for life, it just falls apart, right? So I think
Yeah.
I talked about this in one of my episodes with like could be any narrative, like the transgender, the gender fluidity, or let's say feminism, or could be anything, like any political identity, or any narrative for that matter. People marry it so hard, man, that you like it starts building hatredness. So I think that is what happened in the past also, like not letting other
Sure.
perspectives.
Yeah, it's like because you become attached to your identity and you're not willing to let go of your identity at no matter what cost, Like it's very simple as when uh, let's say you were going to your school and you're very proud of that school. You put it up everywhere. This school, batch of 22, full everywhere. You're very proud of that school, and that is your this thing. I'm from this school, and that's my identity. But then, like a news story comes out that this school was actually, you know, a place where there was a huge money laundering that was happening. Something, they were doing this or something illegal. Then, like, you become like, oh shit, I went to a school where it was like something like this was happening. So then what you try to do is like you try to defend these actions. Oh, they were doing money laundering because they had to provide to all of these families. All the teachers had to get equal pay. Like you start defending, and like you don't realize who you are. So it's very important to like create your own identity and to not attach your identity to someone or something that's not permanent. And yeah, there are like a few fundamental things which you can agree. This is my fundamental right, and this is my fundamental good, right, and this is my fundamental wrong, and stick to that. And my fundamental rights and your fundamental right things, not the fundamental rights, the fundamental right things to do, they might differ. And in those cases, the thing you should do is agree to disagree and not try to make change your version. You can't force anything out of anyone. And we make mistakes all the time. And it's very important to understand where these mistakes are coming from. Is it because this is something I naturally believe in, or is this happening because of something or someone else making me do this, right? So yeah, and like that's what like we end of the day we are silly.
Yeah.
We don't realize how we are being silly either. I might be talking on this podcast and telling that, oh, it's important. But like in my own family, sometimes I'm so rigid with my own views and I won't change it at no matter what cost. So yeah, it's good to be self-aware, but it's also very important to not just be self-aware, but to actually practice what you preach and go do about things and put the effort into, understanding, to communicating and all of that.
Right. I think, Vaishak, as important as it is to develop your identity, you should also keep your identity fluid. Like a part of your identity should be fluid, because if you are not changing, if your identity, if your perspective is not evolving, then are you even growing? Right. So I think as much as you believe something is right, you should also believe in the possibility that you might be wrong, which will help you understand, listen to someone else's perspective. I have such strong, like when I say strong, I mean like really, really strong perspective on things. And I would love if someone dismisses that or like says something contradicting, because I'm challenging my identity, right? Like I'd like to listen. Like if you say I'm wrong with this identity perspective, please tell me why. Because it gives me so much happiness when I change my perspective, partially because I do this podcast, right? Like I want to be updated. I want to be like, I want to keep updating my philosophy, because I don't want to sound dumb, man. Like let's say now I believe this is right, and 10 years down the line, if this is wrong, I would want to document my wrongs through this podcast. Like I want to come back and be like, shit, I was wrong here, I should have changed my perspective. So
But yeah, for sure, agree with you. And it was like really fun talking about all of these stories. And like I don't do this that often nowadays. It was nice to think about all of this and communicate and to put my thoughts into words. It's nice, it's very interesting. So thank you for the platform.
hey man, thank you for deciding to do this. You know what? I can tell that this is one of my favorite podcasts, man. Like hands down, I'm not even joking about it. This podcast gave me so much satisfaction, because this is this ideology, the like what we talked about, right? This is something that I've been thinking about for a really long time, and condensing all of it into one episode, and your perspective and mine overlapped so much that you sort of closed the gaps wherever I couldn't, and it's always lovely talking to you, Vaishak. There's so much exchange that happens. It's just fascinating every time I talk to you. So thank you, man, for being here.
But yeah, for sure. And like something that's like been like an itch in my mind is that like now that like my life has changed so much, in a way that how my lifestyle currently is and the changes that have come along with it. Am I just as creative as I once was? Am I just as funny as I once was? Do I have that same sense of humor? Do I have that same creativity? How am I changing? And it's nice to know that like yeah, change is inevitable and it's a part of your life, but like nothing is permanent and there's nothing for you to be afraid of. You change as a person and it's okay, right? Like something that I would regret was like back when I was in eighth grade, seventh grade, I would read like one book a week. Now I don't do it only, and like it's your life has changed and it's okay for you to do that. And but it's also important to like how can I reconnect with things that gave me happiness. So these all these are there, and like this podcast is really fun for me to do because it gives me a platform to talk about what I want to, and be it like it forces me to think and it forces me to communicate and like how can I structure my views properly, and like yeah, and putting that effort in communicating is like very fun and very fun to do, and see, and most important reason, it's time when I get to socialize with Sankash and Joshi. So all of that fun stuff. Thank you so much for your time. Good stuff.
Hey, man, thank you. For all the people listening, you can find Vaishakh Dutt on Instagram, and he has a YouTube channel as well, right, Vaishak? You have a YouTube channel?
I do, but it's like it's okay.
Yes,
It's there.
yes. Please don't subscribe to it as of now.
It's
But
there.
I'm gonna give links to Vaishakh Dutt's socials in the description. If you guys want to talk to him, you can go. If you are listening to this on audio streaming platforms, hit follow there so that you get more contents of this podcast and more wonderful people like Vaishak.
Yep. Subscribe and follow to a Sankarshan Joshi trip. Everybody, do not miss out.
Yes, you can find the episode on YouTube and also Spotify, JioSaavn, Ghana, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and yeah, that's about it.
Have fun, people.
Yes, bye.
A Sankarshan Joshi trip.